Defining your characters is a big job. Last week, when I started filling out the first part of the worksheet that I created for one of my main characters, the character's fears, their misbelief, their wound, and how they interact with others, I realized that in order for me to keep all of my main characters connected, I needed to create them at the same time so that I can make sure that they aren't separate entities but a cohesive group. Because I have 5 main characters or protagonists and an antagonist as well. And if you haven't seen it, I have linked last week's episode and the worksheet down below for you to check out. Now, for those of you wondering, here's a quick update on my progress for my Writing Journey 2.0 project, specifically on the characters. As I mentioned last week, I have moved house, so I had limited time to work on my story this week, but I have completed everything except the character arcs and the character profiles for my main characters, and I hope to complete those within the next week. So today, I want to share some tips and resources with you that I will be using to complete the character arcs and profiles for my own characters, and hopefully you'll find it helpful for your characters as well. So let's get started. When it comes to character arcs and creating meaningful change in your character, whether it is positive or negative, you want to focus on these 5 different elements. Now, some of them we have talked about last week, but I just want to emphasize their importance to the character arc specifically. Now, when I go through these elements in a minute, I'm going to share examples for each of them from my own project, the character that I created last week, the convict vampire. So the first thing you need to determine your character arc is the misbelief, or the lie that they believe about themselves or the world. As an example, my character believes that he will always be judged for his past and he will never be forgiven. The next thing that you need for your character arc is the character's wound, or the reason for that misbelief or the lie that they believe about themselves. Now, my character, he was abandoned by his friends and family after he was convicted, and they never came around. The third thing that you need for your character arc is the symptoms of their misbelief, or how that misbelief manifests in their lives. Their instinctual behavior because of it, how they interact with others because of their fears that's linked to that misbelief. With my character, he is meek, he's amenable, he's withdrawn, he is basically afraid of being found wanting. The next thing that you need to determine your character arc is what the character wants, and specifically what they want to treat the symptoms of that misbelief. And this want that your character has is usually external. So in the case of my character, he ultimately wants to redeem himself because he wants to be forgiven for his past. And how he can redeem himself, or how he believes that he can redeem himself, is by using his expertise to do something for the greater good. Now, the last thing that you need for your character arc is what the character needs, or in other words, the truth. So your character believes the lie, or the thing that they believe is true about themselves or the world. In this case, the idea that he will always be judged and he will never be forgiven. But what he needs, the truth that he needs, is he needs to forgive himself for what happened and his past. But he also needs to learn that true friends and true family don't judge you on your past. They support you in your future. Now, if you are a pantser or a planter like me, which is between a pantser and a plotter, you might not be able to complete the whole character arc, but that's okay. As long as you know these 5 things and keep them in mind as you're drafting, then you will find it much easier to create a meaningful character arc. I would suggest, however, that at some point after your first draft, that you sketch out the character arc to see if there are any moments where you could or should strengthen the character arc, either by strengthening the misbelief, the wound, the symptoms, the character's want, or the character's need. Alright, so if you need more help with your character's arc, I will highly recommend the book by Weiland, Creating Character Arcs. She also has a workbook with the same title that walks you through exactly how to create your character arcs and how to fit it in with your plot. And I will definitely be using this one when I'm working through my character arcs. Next, let's look at defining your character profiles. And we'll start with your character's personality traits, both positive and negative. Now, your character's traits are the manifestation of their misbelief and fears. So that's a great place to start when you want to determine your character traits. Ask yourself, how does my character behave because of their misbelief and fears? Now, here are a few things to remember when you're creating your character's traits. If you have multiple characters, whether they are main characters or side characters, it's always a good idea to have the different characters' traits play off of each other. This way, you will automatically create friction, tension, and conflict between characters. Also, another thing to remember is try to balance out the positive with the negative, even or maybe even especially with your protagonist. Make sure that every character has a mix of positive and negative traits. You don't want any character to just be good or just be bad. It will be helpful to look at the character's interactions with other people that I added into that creating characters worksheet for you in the description for how they behave in different situations. This will most likely highlight some positive and negative traits that they might have. Now, after this, if you are still struggling with your character's positive and negative traits, then I would suggest and recommend picking up these books by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi, the positive trait Thesaurus and the negative trait Thesaurus. Now, just a quick note on defining your character's behaviors. Each character should be different in how they react in certain situations or when they're in different moods. Now, it is helpful to have a reference for these reactions to ensure that you remain consistent throughout your story. And that's why I added a section for it on the character profile in that character worksheet that I've linked below. And a great tool for figuring out your character's reactions is by using the book The Emotion Thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. Okay, so let's talk about names. Here are some tips to keep in mind when you're creating your character names. Firstly, keep pronunciation in mind. You don't want people to struggle to pronounce the names of your characters, and be especially mindful and vigilant when you're writing fantasy with foreign or made-up names. Now, things that you should try and avoid. First is to have names starting with the same letter. Another thing to avoid is names that sound the same. The last thing to keep in mind when you're naming your characters is to check if your names fit with the genre, the time period, or the culture in your story. If you want some inspiration for character names, or if you want to use an online name generator tool, check out the description where I've added links to websites that I use when I name my characters. Alright, so I'm off to complete my own characters, and you can bet that I will be using the resources that I've shared here today. And if you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on next week's episode. So until next time, may your creativity flow freely and your fingers dance upon the keys. Keep writing with joy and stay connected. Cheers.